we'll start the round soon. As of now. Hi everyone, I am the chair for today's round. My name is Clara. With me I have multiple panels. Starting at the very end, could you please introduce yourselves?
Good luck to all debaters. My name is Ayamon. Good luck, everyone.
My name is CJ. Good luck to all debaters.
Milan Pfeiffer, congratulations.
Congratulations and good luck. Peter, get fighting.
Okay, so we will be timing and clapping, but just in case we miss, please keep your own times and of others. On the motion, this House prefers a world where a strong cultural emphasis is placed on who. I invite PM to the podium. Here,
My God, there's a lot of people.
Can you check if your camera is on?
Pardon?
Can you check if that's working?
Yes. Perfect.
Can someone push the and close the door, please?
Can someone type?
Okay, I'll do it. I'll do it unless somebody has a. Oh, okay.
Ladies and gentlemen, in the current status quo, there is not much emphasis placed on hyo as a concept. We would even argue that it is being neglected. So what does this mean? It means that we are losing the connection with the older generation, which leads to individualism, which consequently leads to neglection of societal connections, which in turn affects the community as a whole. We shall explain this in our arguments, of course. So, what is our burden here? Our burden is that we must prove that a world with a strong cultural emphasis on hyo is a better world than a world where this emphasis does not exist. So let us begin with our definitions. Hyo is a concept where you have deep respect and care for your parents and elderly. So the younger generation must uphold this respect for the elderly for numerous reasons, such as their wisdom and life experience, and also just innate respect towards those people. Now, the most important definition, I believe, in this motion is the strong cultural emphasis on hyo. So, how would we define this? We would define this by stating that it is not the predominant emphasis, it is not we're not focusing completely and utterly on this concept, but it has a relevance in our society. And moreover, we would like to also state that here we do not consider blind obedience to parents and the elderly, right? We still allow for critical thinking. If a person tells you, oh, jump in the river, you will say, why, right? So, of course, critical thinking is involved. So the relevant stakeholders here, as we have identified them, are parents, the elderly, society as a whole, and the younger generation, the younger people, be it in a macro level or on a micro level as individuals. And these parents and the elderly possess wisdom and life experience, and thus we must support them with dignity and gratitude. So allow us to begin our argument. Now, before that, we would like to frame how our arguments will look like. So first we will argue that a cultural emphasis on the concept of hyo is beneficial for the individual, it is beneficial for the nuclear family and the external family as well, and lastly, as a priori reasoning, it also benefits the macro level, which is the community as a whole, or where we live in. So now allow us to actually get into our arguments. With the first one being, it benefits the individual. So, in our world, we care for our family, right? And we care for those family being the parents or the elderly. And what does this mean? This means that we respect their opinion, that we listen to them, that we acknowledge their wisdom and life experience, and we take care of them as they took care of us. Now, why is this important? We identified two main reasons. The first reason being that when you care for your family, let's first say the nuclear family, right? When you care for your family, they will in turn care for you as well. So from a purely individualistic perspective, it is beneficial to utilize the concept of HYDS because it will in the end benefit you as well. So from this, why? Okay, so let's say the parent takes care of their child, right? And so the parent throughout their life, they raise the money to send them to a good college, they support them in their life decisions and such, and this will naturally form a deep connection with the parent, which will then in turn make the child grateful for that parent, and thus they will take care of that parent once they are older, right? This is the natural reasoning that will follow. So even for an individual who thinks purely of themselves, it would still be beneficial to adopt the concept of HYDS, because it will be taken care of later on in their life. And secondly, again, even if we adopt the most individualistic perspective possible, you as an individual will gain wisdom and knowledge from these elderly. Why is this important? We all know that, let's say, reading books is important, right? Because you gain knowledge, but every single person will tell you, you must also gain practical knowledge, right? Because the academic and the practical knowledge benefit one another. But here, if you respect the elderly, they will in turn be able to provide you with this practical knowledge, which will just further improve you as a human being, which even from a completely individualistic perspective would be beneficial for you as an individual. In their side, however, if they do not care for their family, they will first of all not be treated well, or they will not be taken care of when they'll be vulnerable as a stakeholder. And also, they will not gain this practical wisdom and knowledge, which will help them in every path of life. So now we will move on. Okay, so we have identified the individual one. So now the nuclear family and the family above. The elderly people are the most vulnerable stakeholders here, right? Because they have a difficult time taking care of themselves. And so, once we establish this reasoning that if you take care of the people, your elders, they will take care of you, then we will also be able to expand this onto the nuclear and the larger extended family. And so we will live in this sort of harmony between all of these different parts of the family, which will of course be beneficial for all the stakeholders involved. Now, as you may know, I also mentioned the stakeholder of a society. So why would that be beneficial? Because if we have a fulfilled individual who fulfills his family, who fulfills the extended family, then we have these building blocks. So then if we have this harmony between these blocks, we could also extend that harmony to the society as a whole by connecting the families, or the principle of HYDS would connect these families because they are they learned this logic, and so this logic would be extended then to the society as a whole. So now we have covered all three levels, the individual, nuclear, and macro. So now we would like to weigh our side against their side. So in their side, we have, with neglection, we have individualism, which means that you focus on yourself, you neglect others like your family. And if you neglect your family, you will also neglect your friends most likely, because you're closer to your family usually. And if you neglect your friends, then that means that most societal ties are cut, and thus society as a whole will lack cohesion, as my partner will discuss, because I ran out of time. Thank you.
Thank you for that speech, Ella.
So my speech starts in 3, 2, 1. Judge, notice that our side is not willing to say we're going to ruin all the communities, we're going to ruin the harmony of communities at the very get-go. We're not willing to say, Judge, we're going to neglect the value of Hyo at the very get-go, or even if we see in the long-term perspective. But rather what we're willing to say, as I'm going to further elaborate in our team's counterfactual, we're not necessarily going to emphasize Hyo that much. However, there are going to be still educations about community existing in our side of the house. We believe that that in itself will be much more better compared to the government side. So before I get on to my few rebuttals and some arguments that I want to elaborate further, let me first talk about counterfactuals about in today's debate, and moreover talk about status quo and why will the force coming from the parents are going to exclusively exist in their side of the house. So what's our counterfactual, Judge? We're willing to say that first, we're not willing to neglect the fact the value of Hyo should be existing. Hyo is existing in the current status quo. We believe that that in itself can be considered as a value according to the tradition that the nation should have. Two, we're also admit to the fact that in the current status quo, their education is existing, right? Their education is existing towards the students that telling, communities are important. You should collaborate with others. We believe to that extent, we're willing to say that value of Hyo in itself is going to be considered equal with other values in our side of the house, with not having the huge emphasis and not having huge emphasis. But rather, Judge, we're willing to say that the government side, parents is likely, or the older generations are likely to force kids to pay back at the very end of the day, emotionally but also practically. Why is it so? Because we tell you, Judge, in their side of the house, standard of Hyo, because it's a philosophical value, the standard of it differs person by person, and the point that the fact of individuals are constantly comparing with themselves, and because the phenomenon itself is literally justifying the parents to request or have certain amount of expectation towards their kids to pay back to them at the very end of the day, which means that it is going to have a slippery slope at the slippery slope exclusively in their side of the house to force the kids why other kids are doing this, but why aren't you doing that at the very get-go? We tell you that this is going to have a harsh thing, as I'm going to further elaborate in my arguments. Sorry. So within that set, let me move on to our team's rebuttals that came out from the previous speaker, right? The first point that I talked about was there are going to be benefits of individuals and you're going to care about your family. First, we tell you that as long as we're not going to neglect the fact of value of Hyo existing in our both side of the house, one, that's not even the exclusive point from the very get-go. But two, we're also willing to neglect their impacting at the very end of the day, which they talked about. They're going to have some wisdoms and knowledge is provided from their parents, right? We won't believe that that in itself is so much important thing, especially when we consider the current status quo as 21st century. Why? We see in the news currently, Judge, elders are not able to use kiosk, ChatGPT, not familiar with new technologies. Rather, we say that new generations are more capable to adapt to those kinds of technologies. We believe that, yes, there might be certain extent to get some wisdoms or challenge, some knowledges or whatever. We don't believe that that in itself is going to lead to a huge impact at the very end of the day. But however, I'm going to further elaborate more why there are going to be tangible harms only existing in their side of the house, right? But in their side of the house, right? But two, even if, let's say, yes, there are going to be some wisdoms or knowledges existing in their side of the house, and that's so much important thing in today's debate. But as I'm going to further elaborate in my argument, we believe there are going to be even big, harsh, long-term practical laws in their side of the house, So within that said, just let me move on to our team's two arguments, right? First, we believe that in the principal matter, it's literally a parent's responsibility to take care of their kids at the very get-go, and therefore we don't believe that they have their own right to force their kids to pay back at the very end of the day, because one, they're the one who literally chose to have their babies and literally had their option to take the responsibility as a whole. And two, we're not saying that we're going to neglect the fact that they might have expectations towards their kids, but rather we're willing to say that forcing their kids to pay back emotionally and practically is really it's unjust to happen. But three, we also tell that it literally according to this, that it's literally it's responsibility of their parents to take care of their child at their best without willing literally about tangible harms that are going to happen with the new generations in the short term and even in the long term. So 4 points for this. One, we tell you that there are going to be financial burden, so much financial burdens towards the kids. Why is it so? Because we tell you in the current status quo, there's currently economical crisis happening. And two, we also tell you that as the government also can see, the elderly doesn't necessarily have their own capacity to live by own themselves when they get old. Meaning that the kids have to make their elderly lives to run solely even in both sides of the house. What crucial thing is, Judge, in their side of the house exclusively, giving the financial burden towards the kids are actively going to happen, forcing to their side of the house, actively going to happen in their side of the house, right? Because as I previously told you, because the standard of HYDS is so big to begin with, and the comparison between the individuals are constantly going to happen, because Judge noticed that this enforcement in itself is literally directly engaged to elderly's life, quality of elderly's life at the very end of the day. But two, we also tell you, which directly rebuts to their point, we believe that it literally blocks the critical thinking of the new generations. Why is it so? Because we tell you, note that, Judge, and Eastern nations are having huge emphasis on value of HYDS, right? They're literally having hierarchy between the parents and kids, and they're likely to happen. And we believe that if that ends up, it's going to be even hard. That in itself is going to be even harsher in their side of the house, which means that kids are not allowed to say what they want. They cannot actually have their they can actually tell about their full extensions or what so on and so forth. We believe that this in itself just shows in reality in Korea. There's so many numerous cases the parents think their kids as their extension. But we also tell you that there's a vicious cycle happening, because lifestyle is likely to be inherited among parents and they're not likely to be avoided. But four, we also tell you that it locks the kids from other better chances, and this is crucial when we tell you that it's especially impacting the ones that are in bad environments, which are quite vulnerable stakeholders. They need mobility at the very end of the day, but they dissipate this value of HYDS literally locks them to leave from their parents at the very end of the day, which means that they're literally blocked by their other chances, which within having some practical benefits. So within all these reasons, I'm more than proud to oppose.
Thank you for that wonderful speech, DPM.
Seconds.
My mom would always say, 김은아, 너 나중에 꼭 효도 해야 된다. 효도자 돼야 돼. 왜냐면 엄마가 너 때문에 신경도 쓰고 돈도 쓰고, 근데 너 엄마가 늙어지면 너무 서운하잖아, 너가 안 도와주면. Right? Well, here is how we're going to mechanize this, how this can be more of a social impact and what the other side is missing completely. But before that, let's refute all of the points of the first speaker, right? So, the first speaker mentioned that there won't be a neglection of HYDS and serves as a counterfactual, that HYDS will not be neglected, but education will still exist, that communities are important, and the value of HYDS will still be considered equal. And the other side also mentioned that older generations might might force kids emotionally or practically to give them the money or the burden. This is looking at our worst case scenario, but there will be no force in our status quo as the morals of HYDS will be intertwined within our society. Maybe forcing can still exist in the worst case scenario, but understanding your parents' struggle as a foundation means it will still come from the child's critical thinking, and therefore the child will make their individual choices. Why? Because in a society where this is normalized, It's not going to be like, oh, I'm getting forced to do this for my parent. It would be a normal thing to do. Therefore, it would be coming from the child. Because I understand my parents' struggles for me, my parents' experiences as an elder, my respect towards them for their life, for their living such a long life and caring for me, I want to give it back. This is the ideal of Hyo, not I'm going to get forced to do this, I'm going to get practically forced. No, we're not talking about this in this debate. So, another rebuttal that I'd like to give to the other side is they mentioned that they have no right to force kids to pay themselves. So their very own argument is about force and the financial burden given to the child. Once again, no one is forcing the kids to pay up. Elders are not some Italian mobsters or gangsters to say, hey kids, pay up when this is a time. And even if they do so, in our world where Hyo is a very huge emphasis on our society, this wouldn't be coming out of like, oh, I have to do this, or oh, I don't want to do this, but I have to force to. We as human beings or kids will understand why this is essential, and when we are elders, we would also want to be receiving that same care from our kids, right? So, why is this societal? Because, ladies and gentlemen, I'm going to expand on this point later, but we are all going to be old one day. Wouldn't we want to have that safeguard? Wouldn't we want to fall back and say, oh, I could comfortably rely on my kid because of this, right? So, with that point, and also the other side mentioned that this is going to block critical thinking and the new generation and hierarchy should not exist between kids and parents. Well, I think whatever I mentioned, there will be no forcing, so the critical thinking will actually come from the child because they will now listen to the parents, they will understand the parents' struggles and their experiences. Therefore, we believe that that is actually the thinking that they should be doing instead of saying, oh, I don't want to listen to my parents because of that. And wouldn't that be a slippery slope towards your case? Because your case is basically saying, if we're neglecting this, if we're saying that this is a bad thing, wouldn't it lead to a landslide of children suddenly saying, you know what, I shouldn't do this. This isn't normalized. Why do I even have to do this? Let's just be individualistic and think about myself, which will do more harm in the mechanization I'll provide. So let's make this debate human. Let's make it about the societal factors and not abstract, because that will better affect our status quo. That will be more impactful for this debate, right? Right, panel? So, in our world, in our status quo, there will be a strong moral foundation and norm. There's not going to be no forcing. No one's going to, parents are not going to have a gun and point at children being like, pay me up, kid. No, we are going to make this a foundation. It's culturally, no. So, children are expected to honor, care for, and emotionally support their parents. This is going to be a norm, right? And their world, individual autonomy will dominate. Family obligations are going to be optional, and in their worst case scenario, neglected like what's happening in the status quo. Now, there will also be in our world a culture of gratitude, which will be normal, and a social harmony because we understand our elders' struggles, right? But in their world, there will be a slippery slope of a decrease of respect for elders and no safeguards for parents or elders like healthcare or whatsoever that we're going to get into later. So this is not about the blind obedience to parents like what the other side is framing. It's about building a moral stable ground that recognizes honor, sustains that family, and anchors the social cohesion, which will be our second argument coming from this side. Now, let's first talk about the moral foundation, because I think this is very important in this debate that the other side is completely missing. Just to set the ground straight for this debate, societies are grounded in Hyo will produce morally grounded, grateful individuals who will value and understand, sympathize, and sacrifice, that will understand and sympathize with sacrifice and loyalty and respect to elders. How? Because we are talking about a gratitude psychology. People who practice gratitude have higher empathy and lower narcissism, right? Because Hyo instills that reflection on how one's life is built on others' labors, which will lead to humility and purpose, and the impact will be to counter to modern egoistic culture that's happening in our status quo, where entitlement and selfishness is dominating, and my right is better than what my parents think, right? So let's talk about the main mechanization or the social cohesion. So, I'll slow down now a bit. Alright, so let's talk about the strong emphasis on what Hyo creates. It creates a sustainable solution to aging societies like elderly suicide, healthcare that is going down, slowly decreasing because people don't care about the elderly anymore, the most vulnerable stakeholder in today's debate, and a deep-founded respect for their experience, right? Here is how I'm going to mechanize this so that it makes sense, right? Aging populations like Korea, Japan, Europe face collapsing welfare systems because family ties are weak in our status quo. There is no priority that, oh, maybe I should do this for my speaker, right? For my parents, right? Because that isn't really a first thought. Now, why is it important for it to be a first thought? Because the emphasis on Hyo provides a non-coercive, emotionally fulfilling care duty and responsibility. We're not only putting we're not putting a burden on the younger side, but we're telling them to be more caring for the elderly, have more respect and empathy, right? So parents will feel dignity in an old age, or even safety or a certain security, right? And they will have reduced anxiety and be more grateful for whatever they did, right? And there will also be more care for the elderly, and this will lead to prevention of the social atomization that is happening in our status quo, right? We are all going to be elders one day, ladies and gentlemen, or another, and we strongly emphasize that elders are weak, they are vulnerable financially and emotionally and physically, and it is our job as a community, as people of the new generation, to make sure elders have a safeguard to fall back to so they have the care that they need to, because they cannot do it by themselves. It is our responsibility because we could do it for them, and they did it for us. Because our parents cannot go forever due to their old age, thus being the most vulnerable stakeholders in the society, which the other team did not mention. And this is why, ladies and gentlemen, opening government will win. Thank you.
Alright, time for the speech. Yellow.
Olo is going to win this debate by proving three things. First, how we have better relationships with parents. Secondly, how we have a better society as a whole. And third, how we have better individual autonomy, which is a prerequisite for any of the benefits that the government bench wants to claim. So first, how do we get better relationships with parents? Hold on. First, it's important to see how individualism occurs in society when looking at this. I do not think that Hill is going to solve the problems due to individualism, because when people decide to be individualistic because they feel like society expects too much from them and they don't think it's fair, they do not see themselves as getting enough in return, and thus they start to prioritize themselves. This does not get solved with Hill, because Hill, in the process of instilling Hill into your children, the message from your parents is that you should listen to me because I'm your parent. This is not an explanation that is good enough to convince these children, and as such, it doesn't matter if parents actually give their children a lot if the children do not perceive as it is necessary, like it makes sense to give back. And thus, I think we better deal with individualism on our side, because people are not constantly expected to give back, and there's a better perception of better agency, and thus they are less likely to harbor resentment because, like, parents tell me I should give back just because, like, they're my parents. And this is in response to what the OG has said, because they talk about how they are not forcing it onto them, like there's no gun and whatever. The problem is the mechanism for cultural emphasis remains the same. People criticize you for going against the cultural norm. People badmouth you behind your back, and you constantly feel bad, which is why you decide to follow the norm, because this is pressuring you in the first place. It's not like some physical kidnapping or whatever. It's these social mechanisms that still occur on their side, which they have to defend. And the actions are not enforced on them. The actions that are enforced on them are not the most extreme types of actions. There are things like overworking yourself. You need to set the table for everyone just because you're the child. It's small things like that that start to increase and increase over time because the child keeps following these expectations, and so it is normalized for the child to listen to them, and as such, the child gets larger and larger responsibilities, and they see it as their duty to fulfill. And because of these social pressures, they are likely to conform, not because of what they said. And they also talked about how this benefits the individual. The problem, as said by the LO is that the world is constantly evolving and things have changed. And the problem is, even if the advice is good or have some merit, this advice is seen as the law just because there's a strong emphasis on HYDS. This means that they do not see themselves as being in a position to challenge the advice given from their parents. So even if they know that the world has changed, they are still not willing to dare to question their parents because they have the authority just because of this value. And how do we get better relationships with parents? We are going to talk about how we get a better relationship when dealing with two types of households. First, we talk about, in their best case, parents have good incentives and treat their children well, and in another case on bad households on how
Point of information.
I'll take it.
Alright, so the info slide mentioned, it doesn't really talk about forcing, but rather a deep understanding which actually stems from the child and not the parent forcing. Where did opposition side get this idea of forcing? Thank you.
Do you think there is no forcing? Social pressures by society does not necessarily force you. No one on the street is going to tell you to do it. It's just that you feel a pressure. You feel something, like you feel glares from the society, which is why you decide to do it. No one's explicitly forcing you to do it. You just decide to conform because you think it's easier. And yeah, so in good households, why do you have better autonomy? Like even in the best case where parents are in their best intentions taking care of you, why do you still get worse autonomy and worse relationship? First, for social improvement, especially if you want to give back to your family, you need as a prerequisite to be a bit selfish. You need to be able to take the first step to, for example, move abroad, to go to a better school, to get a better job, to make more money. And this is logically prior to what they said, because in order to give back to your family in the first place, in order to repay everything they've given to you in the first place, you need to have the capacity to give back. If you do not have money, it doesn't matter if you want to give back or not, if you just do not have it. And even in their best case, where parents would support the child and give a lot of love, why is this still bad? Because it also locks you out of your preferences. This is related to the advice argument, because when they talk about how you get advice from your parents, for example, your parents lived in the past and they have experience in the workforce. And so even if your preferences is studying like the humanities, for example, based on your parents' advice, they say that it's better to do STEM. However, even in their best intentions, they're still locking you out of following your preferences, and such, it worsens your individual autonomy. And you also, and in bad households, you are more likely to be, the child is more likely to be able to step out of those bad households because they do not see the responsibility to give back just because it's a parent. And so we actually enable people to leave leave households that are actively bad for them. And we think that this creates as mentioned by the LO, it creates a vicious cycle, and I'll mechanize it. You see as a child the injustices your mother face. For example, your grandmother is always telling your mother to do something, and you see that, and this is the role model you are looking up to. And as such, this is normalized. So you are more likely to accept subservience to your parents just because you see this as the normal kind of relationship you have. And this can extend to outside work, such as like in outside of the family, such as work, and where hierarchies are so bad. And even if everything is true that what they said, that even in the best case where parents are doing everything they can, they are treating the child well, they are not forcing them to do anything, why do we still get better help from children? It's because the help from the child is more genuine. When children do give back, these are instances when it's not because this is the right thing for you to do. It's not because this is a cultural narrative that's telling you that this is the right thing you should do to care for your parents. They are giving back because they genuinely see their parents giving to them, and they are genuinely grateful for that, which is why in the instances when they do give back, it's much more impactful. And we are better able to deal with individualism because people are not constantly expected to give back. They have a better perception of agency and whatnot, and because we have shown you a better society and how children are better able to give back, we hope.
That concludes the opening comments and debate. I invite member of government to the podium.
before I move on to some of the extensions our team came up with, I first want to make a few rebuttals to the opening opposition team. So the main argument of the opening opposition team was the burden the child would face when there is a huge emphasis on who on the society. And they're talking about how the parents are probably going to push financial burdens toward their children, how the parents are going to make their children try to take care of them and force children to pay back for what they have given all year. And we think that we do not think can really agree with this because because we do not think that the emphasis on the who does not make parents either. The parents obviously cares for their child. Their love for their child is the same in both words. So why would their parents who wants best for their child, who loves their child, suddenly want to push such big burdens on their children just because there's an emphasis on the who in the society? So we think that if the opening opposition team wants to talk about the, I take that as 6. If the opening opposition team wants to talk about the financial responsibility or some kind of other force that the parents are going to force towards their children, I think they have to prove why the emphasis on who will actually make the parents want to do this, because the parents will know that them doing this will make their children very uncomfortable and make it very hard for their children. So we do not think that the parents really have the incentive to make, most parents wouldn't have the incentive to make their children follow these kinds of rules, even if there's an emphasis on who on society. And we also think that there is going to be a check and balance system that is so that even if there is this, we acknowledge that there is some kind of problem that can follow from this, such as like parents pushing some kind of responsibility towards the children. Even if we bite the bullet and say that that is going to happen, we think that there is going to be a check and balance system in the society, because the children are not just interacting with their parents. They also have a lot of access to social media. They have access to other younger people. They aren't just going to just listen to their parents. If there's this kind of problem that the opening opposition team kept mentioning that is going to happen in the society, then there's also going to be a lot of backlash. Well, I take that as 6. A lot of backlash coming from this, and there's going to be a lot of people who talks about how hard it was for them when their parents forced these kind of things on them, and there's going to be a lot of negative talks about this kind of stuff, so that if there's a lot of backlash and if people share their experiences about if you actually inconvenience them in this kind of way, then there's going to be the societal narrative that show should not be abused. Show should be about respecting elders, not abusing it in some kind of way, so that the parents will be forcing them children to do something that they do not want to do. So because of this reason, we do not think that the elders or the parents are going to force their child or children into the circumstances that they do not want to be in. And next, moving on to, before that I take the P1.
You talked about check and balances are existing in the status quo, for example, like social media, but how ever social media is going to work as a check and balance where emphasis on who is existing in the current status quo?
Even if the emphasis on who is existing on the status quo, if the problem that you keep talking about actually happened in the society, there are going to be people who speak up about their experiences, talk about how it negatively affected them, and there's going to be, because of this talk on social media or like on other sorts of platforms, people are actually going to acknowledge that this abusiveness of using who in a way that who is not for, like who is supposed to be about respect for elders, not forcing their children. There's going to be talks about that, so people will acknowledge this even more. And now moving on to my extensions. The first extension is that we think that the emphasis on who is going to be much better for the younger people, because it will give them a more realistic view of society. We think that this is going to be happen because nowadays there's a lot of people taking a lot of things for granted from their parents. Like their parents are paying their college tuition. A lot of people take this for granted without considering the hardships, because they are used to their like mother and father going to work every day and earning money, and they think that this is just like ordinary. They do not really acknowledge how hard this is, and they do not really want to listen when the parents are saying how hard this is for them, because they kind of consider it as lecturing and does not really want to listen to their parents, and we think that this will make a very unrealistic view of society, and think that all of the hardships that the adults are actually going through, people will think that this is not that hard, and we're undervalue the hardships that the actual adults are going to. So we think that this is going to be bad for the younger generation, because they're going to be very underprepared when they actually face all of the societal troubles that they may face in the society. So we think that this could, if there's an emphasis on hope, then people were actually able to value elders' experience, elders' wisdom, listen to how hard it could be living in society as an adult, and when they face this kind of problems, they have incentive to ask for elderlies for help. Like, they wouldn't consider asking for help as shameful act. They will try to ask. They have incentive to ask for them because, as I mentioned before, they value elderlies' experience and wisdom. And next over, the new extension that we want to add on to is that we think that the emphasis in hope is going to solve a lot of the generational conflicts that exist in the society. So because a lot of the societies are becoming more and more elderly concentrated, there's a lot of problems following this, such as like generational conflicts where the elderly and younger people doesn't agree on a lot of topics. There's more bigger problems such as the national pension system, where that happens directly because of the elderly concentrated society. And we think that because there's a lot of generational conflicts happening in this way, the politicians are actually, rather than trying to solve this kind of problem, they're using this generational conflicts to, in an emotional way, to get more votes from the majority, from the society. So if there's a politician who wants to focus on getting the votes from the elderly, then probably they'll talk about that even more and use an emotional narrative to that. And if there's a politician who's trying to get votes from the younger generation, then probably they'll push that emotional incentive towards that too. And we think that rather than this actually solving a lot of the problems that follow from the elderly concentrated society, we think that this makes a lot of unnecessarily additional political problems rather than actually solving the problems in a more rational way, which my second speaker is going to talk more about in our later speech. Thank you.
Thank you for that speech. Member of opposition.
Sorry, 1 second. Sorry. I'm going to start my speech in 3, 2, 1. Right. So I want to start with my speech with some rebuttals to what the government side so far has explained to us. Essentially, they tell us, oh, Hyo is going to be only beneficial. It's only going to be like, everybody's going to care, and all families are going to be perfect, and like suddenly society is going to be like super bonded. We're going to go into all of these things. My main rebuttal for now would be the argument that's saying, hey, essentially like, because your elders are instilling certain values on you, like all the kids are also suddenly gonna have like the same values, as if all elders right now already have the same values, and then there's gonna be some magical connection between like all of these kids, and then community is gonna be like so harmonious. And then additionally, you have to think like something that was really pushed from like the closing government was essentially saying, hey, this is going to create harmony between like this generational divide. But as our opening site has already explained to you, this is a massive financial burden for like these young kids, right? Because you have to think in majority of countries, we have an aging population. We have a population that's increasingly becoming old. We have way more old people than we have young people, right? Because you have to keep in mind that these old people still have to be taken care of. Financially, like physically, however you imagine that to be. And in their scenario, that essentially would lead to the fact that then the government is going to excessively rely on these people, right? Because if everybody around you tells you, if the philosophy in society is instilled and it tells you, hey, here is a strong dominant narrative, people are very likely to buy into it and being like, hey, I should feel responsible for my parents because they have raised me and they brought me into this world. So now I am financially responsible on like taking care of my parents when I'm older, but I'm also there to like have to like change their diapers, like bring them to doctor's appointment. That's a massive burden for most kids to take, right? Because that's like our first stakeholder in this debate. So you have to think these kids have to like essentially work double because they have to make up the finances for that, right? But then they also have to physically be there and take care of their parents, which is an insane financial burden and like just emotional burden overall, because then you also have to think most parents have one kid, right? Realistically, like most parents are not having this many children. So you have one kid taking care of two parents. That's like an insane burden to put onto these children. And then additionally, we also have to tell you that this is not the only stake, right? Like opening has already mentioned like children, and we just like quickly wanted to emphasize on why exactly and make that out.
You want?
Not right now, sorry. But we're on our side of the house going to particularly emphasize why our scenario is actually even going to be better for the parents, right? Because in your scenario, you're talking about like essentially like exclusively relying on your kids, right? Because that's everything so far that the government side has proposed to us. Let's say your kids are like not economically well off. They're not economically like capable of taking care of you. Let's say your kids like get into an accident, they're injured, they're not capable of taking care of you. They die. You don't have kids or you don't want to have kids. Then should you in this society now like have to start having kids? Because like that's the only way you can take care of yourself when you're old. Because that's exactly what like opening government has told us. Opening government came in and they were like, yeah, we're not going to force anyone, but like, you know, and when I'm an elder, I do kind of like expect my kids to take care of you. So you're not saying you're forcing anyone, but the expectation is going to be instilled into children, like from a young age, and that's still going to be, that burden is still going to exist nevertheless, right? Sure.
Because raising children is financially burdensome, should we just not have children in the end?
So ultimately that's a decision you're making, right? But planning in the long run is like way different. Having children now is way different than saying, hey, I'm having children now as a financial decision to like improve like my, like potentially improve like my well-being when I'm like an elderly, right? Because you have no guarantee for that. And that's like our main argument. Because we want old people to also be protected. We want them to be safe, right? Because on our side of the house, we say if you don't have kids and if you're not relying excessively on you, instead, because old people make up a huge portion of society, it's highly likely that they will influence politics to a point that they will be able to secure like themselves a good retirement fund, that they're able to have like government support, right? That's highly likely to exist on our side of the house because we are buying into the fact that there are like simply proportionately more elderly people, right? And they do also want to like secure themselves. So instead of putting that burden on children and like having that like unstable scenario, we're going and we're saying, hey, we're instead gonna like burden the government who should be responsible for elderly care, right? And they're gonna have to like step into that, right? So ultimately, we're gonna like protect both stakeholders, in this case, children and parents, but we're also going to foster better relationships, right? Because relationships are not going to be simply like based on like, oh yeah, I was like, my parents birthed me, so I should, right? Because that fosters like a lot of resentment. Ultimately, on our side of the house, People are still going to take care of their parents if they have a good relationship with them. This relationship, however, is not going to be based on the fact that your parents are wiser than you or like simply older, but because they treated you well, because they fostered the good relationship with you as a kid, because they made the effort and bonded with you in alternative ways, simply in saying, hey, I'm relying on you and my kids will like buy into it and they will take care of me, right? So instead, we're going to have more authentic relationships between parents and children, and we're going to have a higher chance that actually like this generational divide is going to close in on our side of the house, right? And we're also going to prevent the kids that aren't able to take care of their parents to be publicly shamed, or that aren't willing. Like if you have a bad relationship with your parents because your parents didn't take good care of you, you're not going to be shamed on our side of the house because you aren't willing or capable to be taking care of your parents at an old age. But also like economically and like largely societal, it's going to be like a very stagnant society that they're presenting to us. Because essentially all we're doing is listening to elders, right? We're going to install professors because they're wiser and they should know better and we should listen to them. But that's also going to go for workplaces, right? Because then we're always going to listen to like the superiors there first, the elder superiors. We're not going to have innovations. We're not going to have young people pushing ideas because they're scared that there's going to be backlash under this concept of yo, right? That's undeniable to argue because simply you're scared of disrespecting your elders and are less likely to push your own ideas and narratives and challenge them. That also goes for like other stuff as like feminism, right? Women are going to be proportionately like more affected under our scenario because it's going to be burdening women way more. And with that, we're proud to oppose.
Thank you for that speech, Government Whip.
Can you check that this is still recording?
Yes.
It was recording, so next game.
Okay. Government Whip starting speech in 3, 2, 1. My speech will contain mainly 3 stages. First, the direct rebuttals from the opposition bench, and moving on to our unique extension and explaining why we contributed most onto this debate. Firstly, regarding the closing of opposition's rebuttals, I think the argument regarding the massive financial burdens or not pushing the people itself is very symmetric to the opening opposition's bench, and we already proved in our members' bench, and we already covered in our previous members' rebuttals, so I want to elaborate more onto our unique extensions as well. And for the closing opposition, they have mentioned that still, in our side, the expectation still exists, which will be the burden to the individuals. But however, yes, there could be the situation where the hill could be abusively used in our side of the world, and this is the reason why, in our side of the world, where hill will emphasize more into the society, that we believe the social narrative that the hill should not be abusively used, this also narrative will be created in our society as well, which means that still the burden of the expectation will unlikely to happen in our side of the world. And also, and regarding the opening opposition's rebuttals, regarding the social norm that it will create more larger responsibility and social pressure, which was the symmetric to the opposition's bench. Firstly, we want to say that why eventually the social pressure will unlikely to be happen. But firstly, we want to say in our premise, and this is the clash in our debate, I think, as well, because rather than just forcing individuals to always give A's or make the individuals think the hill as the obligation, we still provide the natural environment where the people consider the value of the hill itself and to understand their duty to take consideration of their parents. So we believe, and we also explain that there is still the parents' incentive to love their children, and they also don't likely to push their children to have their burdens to themselves itself. So we believe for these 2 layers of the reasoning, we don't believe that the the action itself, or the responsibility, or the social pressure will be likely to happen in our side of the world. And moving on to the moving on to the OO's rebuttals as well, they have mentioned that there will be the lack of autonomy to the children, which will have not likely to follow their preferences. But this is the premise on this argument is that the children is just accepting these norms. But as we said in our world, which means that there will unless likely to happen of these forceful action or just make the children follow 100% of the parents' needs. We already proved you that these kinds of situations will unlikely to happen. So moving on to our extension and elaborating more, we covered that. Firstly, I'll take later. Firstly, if there is not the existence of this hill, we believe that people can consider that taking things for as granted. So we can actually provide the individuals of the realistic view, and it will impact more, and we will provide more better world because there is still the society and the social status that people neglect the social efforts and the parental supports and the status quo. And we believe that this success or the property that individual has in the first place, this not only comes from the own individual's efforts, but these are made through the elderly and the parent support as well, which means that it can actually provide the perception among the individuals. That means that you cannot just achieve these achievements or the properties only by your own efforts. So we can create this kind of social narrative and the realistic view to the individuals to not to take their properties or the success for as granted. And also we mentioned the extension, which was there could be the solution to the generation conflicts as well regarding the hatred towards the elderly, because in the status quo there is still the absence of the miscommunication between the younger generation and the older generation, and there is also the lack of communication between the two generations. So we believe that if there's a strong cultural emphasis placed on Hyo, we believe that it can change the perception because firstly there will be more communication towards these two generations, and since there are more respect and the gratitude towards these generations, we believe it can naturally change the perception that the elderly are the ones who created this current society through their efforts and the wisdom. And this will eventually be better because this will have the availability to solve these kinds of generation conflicts, not only for the hatred or the bias towards the elderly, but especially on the younger generation, that they will also have to become the older generation later. And we also want to emphasize that in the fast-changing society where the technology keeps trying to evolve and the changes, we believe that the elderly are the stakeholders who are in the vulnerable situation to actually get support by themselves. And we believe, since they are very hard to adopt to these kinds of environments, through the strong cultural emphasis placed on Hyo, it can protect this elderly from providing more supports onto these people and making the younger generations or the other individuals to take more consideration of these hardships the elderly is facing nowadays. So first I will take Hyo.
About the social narratives that there are going to be naturally being some check and balances, backlashes against the abusive Hyo or whatever. How are they going to be created a sudden community that goes against the abusement of those kinds of Hyo?
Firstly, we don't think that it will just radically happen in the first place. Firstly, we don't even depict as it would just happen right soon as we have the emphasis on the Hyo itself. But we are trying to say that eventually the social atmosphere will be created in the first place, which can give we can still give the incentive for the society to focus on these kinds of norms and onto this atmosphere as well. We are not just saying that since we have more emphasis on Hyo can just radically making up more these bonds or kind of these preferences, but as I said before, since the social atmosphere itself has the incentive to change, this is the reason why it can actually lead to these kinds of results as well. So we think this is so important since, as we say in the status quo, the society is becoming more elderly concentrated society, since these stakeholders quantity are increasing as in the status quo. We believe since the world where the strong cultural emphasis, especially placed on Hyo itself, is very beneficial to not only the stakeholders, the elderly, but for the younger generation as well. Not only in the societal extent, but in the individual extent as well. And these are the reasons why we think we actually contributed most onto this debate and alleviated the opposition's bench arguments as well.
Now to conclude the debate, opposition whip.
Okay, I keep saying this, but I'm fully losing my voice, so I'll be as loud as I can, but can't talk super loud. So yeah, give me 1 sec, please, and then I will start. Both government benches today have given you an incredibly idealistic view of the family unit in the modern world. They have not once taken into account the fact that modern families are ever changing. Divorce is rising amongst every single demographic, and families do not look like just a man and a woman being married to each other for forever. There's a constantly evolving norm that we are seeing in today's society that no one on the government bench has even thought to mention in this debate. But whatever, for a second, let's just buy in and only focus on the arguments that they have told you, and let's look at why a lot of the things they say don't really hold up when you examine them a lot closer. First of all, they have continuously claimed there's not going to be a force of hyo in this world, but if the societal expectation is that you respect your elders, how is that not forcing? If the societal expectation and the societal norm is that this is what you're supposed to do, that this is the best option because everybody does it, how is that not forced? Because there's going to be a subconscious and subliminal idea that this is what I have to do, and if I don't do it, either there's something wrong with me or I'm a bad child. So I don't understand how their belief that it's not going to be forced holds up in this world when societal pressure tells you this is what you have to do. Moving on though, both government benches today have told you that their societal retirement plan is their kids. They have told you that what they are banking on is their children are not only going to be able to protect them and take care of them when they're older, but they're going to want to, and there's going to be the infrastructure in place for them to do that within their own families, because they're going to have the space within their houses, they're going to have the extra income, and they're going to have the mental and labor capacity to take on the work that comes with dealing with elders. I just don't understand where this jump was fulfilled, because they truly didn't. They didn't explain how there's going to be a norm then for kids to always get the high-paying job, to always have the biggest house, to always have the ability to do all these things when, again, I mean, if I have to take care of my parents, that's 2 more people in my house I have to take care of. I need to be able to house them, feed them, pay for their medical expenses. Old people have medical expenses. On top of my own, I have to pay for theirs too. That's a lot of financial burden. But whatever, we don't want to talk about that. They've already mitigated it, which personally I don't believe. But let's talk about why they completely ignored what really is the most vulnerable stakeholder.
More information.
Sure.
Where did opposition side get the idea that everyone has to live together and the parents should be in our houses? Thank you.
Okay, so then in your world, you're paying for a whole other house? They're not living in my house, so you pay for their apartment too? Or you pay for their nursing home, which is just as, if not more expensive than an apartment. And then if you pay for another apartment, you have to go over to the apartment every day outside of working your job, or your partner has to do it, but they also have to work a job because you have to take care of their parents as well. So honestly, that just made your situation worse, because you're saying that you either have to pay for a big enough house where all your family can live, or pay for a whole other house where they can live, which is a larger financial burden. But let's talk about the most vulnerable stakeholder, again, which is the parents as they get older. Because it is a reality, kids die. It's sad, kids die. Also, on top of that, people don't have kids. People's kids grow up and go into poverty. There is a very real chance that a significant number of people in the world, their retirement plan is not going to be there, or it's not going to be viable, and they're not going to be able to do this thing. That is what CO is telling you today. This is what we are addressing, and this is what our unique extension is we are telling you that the most vulnerable stakeholder not only is not addressed, but it is not cared for in their world, whereas in our world, it is. Because our societal plan isn't our children. It's that the government does what the government should do and take care of elders. They should have things like Social Security, like insurance, like Medicaid. They should have these things in place, which, yeah, we agree that the systems currently are not working. But does that mean then that I should go and have kids and expect my kids to be the ones to take care of me because the government's not? No, I should put this expectation on my government to fix the system to then take care of me. Why am I doing the thing where I'm having kids so that they'll protect me when I'm old, and then when they can't, guess I'm homeless? Like, what's the solution there? What's happening once they can't take care of me? And I really want to emphasize that in their best case scenario, most, but importantly not all parents are good to their children, and there is no protection for elderly besides an ever shrinking younger population, as every single one of these benches today have told you that the younger population is shrinking and the elder population is growing. So you are placing, their best case scenario is placing this expectation on the younger population, whereas our worst case scenario, you know what, sure, maybe people will be more individualistic, but there's going to be an actual systemic protection in place for elders who are the most vulnerable, and kids aren't going to be expected to listen to potentially abusive parents because society is telling them, hey, if you don't listen to your parents, you're a bad kid.
You know what?
Yeah.
When did the government mention that the elderly would rely on the kids 100%?
I believe your speech, you said, I want to have kids and they're going to help take care of me when I'm older. There also was in all of the speeches given, you guys are basically saying that you're going to have kids and you're going to want to have kids and then you're going to take care of the kids because then those kids are going to take care of you. So if, again, you're this expectation that you're creating is that there's not the societal systems in place to do those things. That's not anything that you even addressed in your world. To say, okay, even in the instance where it doesn't happen, here's what's gonna take care of those people that don't have kids, whose kids don't like them, whose kids die, whose kids don't have the ability financially to take care of them. Sure.
What is the mechanism behind a lot of parents suddenly wanting to force and burden their children to take care of them just because there's an emphasis on it?
It's the societal expectation and the societal messaging that to be a good child is to listen to your parents. Because what you are saying within Hyo is you are saying that it's highlighting the importance of respecting your elders and taking care of them. So if you're saying this is the most important thing, that's not what we care about. Okay, to really quickly finish up this debate, where did I put my notes? Oh my god. Okay, so the OG was, first of all, super idealistic and didn't take into account the vulnerable stakeholders that don't have kids or the kids that have bad families. The OO missed a very important stakeholder in the parents in society that don't have children or whose children don't have the ability to take care of them. And the CG provided, first of all, an unrealistic view of modern society and also tried to claim that Hyo would be the thing to solve the generational divide when, if I'm gay and my grandma's homophobic, Hyo's not going to fix the fact that she's homophobic and I'm gay. So, at the end of the day, CEO takes this debate home because he cares the most about